Hi everyone. Lately there's been a whole lot of articles on the internet devoted to hiking. Kind of make you feel like if you're not committing 6 months to make a end-to-end hike on one of the major trails in the United States, then you're just not cutting it. Was that really true? Is that what it takes to become a hiker? Well, let's investigate that. Well, if you were to just read the popular press or internet articles or YouTube videos, you might be convinced that a through hike, a hike from end to end of one of the major trails in the United States, is the only way to hike. So we call that a through hike. I'm going to get into definitions of a through hike in a moment. But there's other types of hikes. You can do a flip flop, which I'll get into. You can do a section hike, which there's various kinds of that. There's long section hikes. There's out and backs, where you start in a place, go out, and then just turn around and come back. There's circuits where you start and end in the same place, but maybe you take a series of trails to get back to your starting point. And then, of course, there's the traditional day hike, and you can combine that with, say, climbing 4,000 footers. That's a popular pastime, actually, in the Northeast. Maybe out west, 4,000 footers is nothing, but in the East, you're starting at sea level. Climbing all the 4,000 footers, say, in New England and New York is an accomplishment that people strive for. So you may be surprised to hear that there's actually controversy on what is actually a through hike. So here we have just a map of the Appalachian Trail as an example. And is a through hike just an end to end in one direction and uninterrupted? Well, what about if you have to go on a side trip, some kind of emergency, like you're getting married or something, and you have to take a day or two out to go to the ceremony before you continue on with your hike? Is that count as a through hike? Well, what about a flip-flop, where you start maybe in the middle and hike to one end and go back to the middle and hike to the other end? And then there's the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's definition, and that is if you've done the whole trail, no matter how you manage to do it, all within a 12-month period, then that's considered a through hike. Doesn't have to be the same calendar year. Could be, June to May of the next year. Or is a through hike simply a hike through a particular area? And you may be surprised to find out that the only definition that has some kind of legal meaning is if we're talking about this last one as a trip through an area. For example, in Pennsylvania, there's signs all over the trees defining what a through hike is, and that's what gives you permission to maybe do some stealth camping. In other words, camping at large. You have to be a through hiker to do that, and that means hiking through the area and not coming back to your starting point. In Maine, there are certain campgrounds in Baxter State Forest or Baxter State Park Forest, whichever it is, that you actually can't use unless you've come through the 100-mile wilderness, which classifies you as a through hiker. So a southbounder who's actually just trying to get up to the top of Katahdin so they can really start their hike can't use that particular campground. And in the Smokies, the definition of a through hiker is somebody who starts 50 miles outside of the park and continues on until they're 50 miles beyond the other end of the park. And that constitutes a through hiker, and that's what actually changes your priorities or what facilities you can use, and perhaps even the cost of your permit to hike through that area. So when I was out on my long section hike last year, I heard this story about a young lady hiker who had this complaint about all the section hikers who were using the facilities down in the south when the through hikers really needed them. And my initial reaction upon hearing that was, wow, you entitled little hiker, you. That's, everything is, those facilities are out there for everybody to enjoy. And my second thought was, 80% of the through hikers down there are actually only section hikers, in the sense that 80% of them aren't going to make it the whole way. They just don't know which ones of them are actually the section hikers. But then I thought about it with a little more sympathy. And when you think about it, the people who are doing an end-to-end through hike, and when I say through hike or unqualified, that's typically what I'm some kind of end-to-end through hike. They're time constrained. They have to start within a narrow 1 month window down south if they're northbound, or within a different narrow 1 month time frame window when they're up north if they're southbound. And section hikers actually can make adjustments. And while I've always, hiked my sections in the off season to avoid the crowds, trying to do myself a favor, actually I'm doing exactly what the ATC wants us to do, and that's take the pressure off. So, seriously, the young lady hiker actually had a point. If you're going to do section hiking, and that's great. I mean, that's what I do. Let's hike in the off season. Let's stay away from the crowds and let the people who are time constrained take advantage of those facilities. So what I'm doing is I'm being a coward. I'm ducking the whole situation. I'll call myself a through hiker when there's a legal definition that I must and do meet in order to use a particular facility. When I was hiking through Pennsylvania, an interesting little thing happened. I was at one of the lodges. Lodge is just kind of an enclosed campsite, and there was a caretaker in a building nearby. And some people had come up, and they had driven up to the campground, and they had prearranged it, but I guess they didn't make clear that they were driving up to it, and the caretaker was yelling at them, telling them that they couldn't do that. That was just wasn't allowed. You can't just drive up and use our camp facilities. This is for people who are hiking through. Then he looked over and he saw me sitting there at the lodge. He said, "Did you drive up here?" I'm like, "Oh man, I was at Outer Bridge Shelter last night." And then he was like, "Oh wow, man, you're going to be hurting tomorrow." Because that was actually the longest day I had. Out of necessity, I just had to keep on hiking and hiking and hiking. But the attitude is out there, and there's actually sometimes reason for it, and sometimes it's just snobbery on the part of some people. And in the case of when there's a legal definition, there's actually a reason for it. So it's interesting that a through hiker who or somebody who wanted to be a through hiker who only makes 1,000 miles, they consider themselves failure. I met a guy, Flower was his name. He was considering himself a failure because he'd come 1,000, 1,100 miles, and he realized he had to get off the trail. It was partly for health reasons, partly for financial reasons. But he considered me to be probably a success because I intended to do 566 miles, and at that point looked like I was going to succeed, and I did. So how is 1,000 miles a failure and the 566 miles a success? I mean, I think they're both successful, but there is something about starting out intending to do something and not being able to finish it. So I'm going to duck the whole controversy and just say, hey, if you're out there, whatever you're doing, your thing, just enjoy it. So let's look at the various different types of hiking. There's day hiking, and there are advantages to it. There's less specialized equipment needed, and you don't have to carry as much. Now, here's a picture of Amber when she went hiking with me over the Seven Sisters Ridge. Her pack looks pretty big there, but that's actually just a pack that you might use for carrying books to school or something. It looks big because her coat, she had a heavier coat that she had kind of jammed in there, but it's actually a rather light backpack, and mine was equally light. There's no long-term commitment. If you're goal-oriented, you can combine it with some other goal, like climbing all the 4,000 footers, like I'd mentioned before. There are some disadvantages. You usually need to stay close to a single home base, probably your home, though if you were maybe doing day hikes up 4,000 footers, you might be able to actually find a campground, say in the White Mountains, and on a daily basis drive to a trailhead, climb up the mountain, climb back down, go back to the campsite. Next day, do the whole thing over again at a different trailhead. So, but you're still kind of, if you're doing day hikes, whether it's just one in isolation or a bunch of them associated with a trip, you are tied to a home base. And you get limited backpacking experience as far as the whole joy of being out overnight, if that's something you consider would be something you'd enjoy. For me, it is. For other people, that may be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. So that's day hiking. There are moderate sections that you can do. I actually did that for many years, and by moderate sections, I mean 2 or 3 nights in a row, maybe only one overnight. 40, 50 miles maximum. The advantage is you do get the overnight experience if that's what you want. It is less time commitment, obviously, than a 6-month time commitment to do an end-to-end hike of the entire Appalachian Trail. The disadvantages, there are complicated logistics. The farther you're going away from where your home happens to be, the more logistically challenging it becomes to get there and then hike somewhere and then get back from there. Now, that's why actually in the past couple years, my section hikes have been much longer because, there's kind of an economy of scale there. I only have to get to a difficult trip to a trailhead once. For example, I have to go down to Roanoke this year. Surprisingly, and I'll do another video on the cost there, that was actually a very cheap train ride with the ticket that I got. There are lashes and end-to-end hikes. A lash is a long section hike, and some long section hikes can be longer than an end-to-end hike on a shorter trail. So, they're we can group them together. The advantages is you do get the overnight experience. You do become part of a small, tight-knit community. And I forgot to mention one of the disadvantages of the shorter section hikes is that you never get trail legs. Trail legs, where you're finally comfortable hiking, and hiking no longer seems like the chore. On a shorter section hike, you never really get out of that state. On the longer ones, you can actually be into the state where you have trail legs. Some of the disadvantages are, it's a long-term time commitment, whether it's 6 months to do the whole trail or 2 months to do the 730 miles that I'm planning on doing. It's a time commitment a lot of people can't make. Fortunately, I'm retired, so I can make that time commitment. And I have a very understanding wife, and I don't know, maybe she wants me out of the house for 2 months. It is very challenging, and not just physically, but mentally and socially and financially, perhaps. Probably the physical and the mental challenges, though, that's very tough. I mean, it's tough to get up on some days and just say, it's back to work today, and my work is walking 15 miles or whatever it is. So it is a challenge. And some people actually, they revel in that and they grow from that. So while it's a disadvantage, maybe the fact that it's very challenging may actually be an advantage. And in a way, I do find it to be an advantage. So the bottom line is we shouldn't be worrying about what we call our hikes. We should be more thinking about how we're going to maximize our enjoyment of the experience. And in other words, what's best for you. If it's a day hike, there's no shame in that. It's great. You're still doing more than most people do. You're getting out in the woods and you're having a good time and some physical exercise. So there's a better attitude we can take. I was looking at a hiker's blog, I forget which one it was, and there was, like I'd said earlier, a lot of hikers' ink being spilled on what is a thru hiker. And actually, there was a lot of vitriol in there too, and people arguing about it. I mean, I told in another video the story of a hiker I ran into in Maine who insisted that if you weren't a northbound hiker who started in Georgia and we're going to end on Mount Katahdin, then you had no business being out there because that was the only right way to do it. Of course, that would make the trail actually unused for a lot of the year if you keep that attitude because of the time frame that you can do it. So, that's kind of silly. I hope that young person now, it's 10 years later maybe, that they've gained some emotional maturity. But I found this comment by a hiker named Aaron. I know nothing about the person, just it's obvious from what he wrote that he is a hiker. If I meet him out on the trail someday and somehow we make the connection and understand, oh, this was the Aaron guy that Russ was talking about, I want to shake his hand and, buy him a coffee or a pizza or something because I thought this was great. So I'm going to leave it up there for a few moments so that you can read it yourself. I'm not able to read it to you just because of where it is on the screen in front of me. I'd have to be craning my neck and looking around things. So I'll leave it up and take a look at it. But let's all be more like Aaron. Thanks for listening.